Good morning. Isn't it great to be together? So we've already sung probably a portion of my message this morning, so we can nearly just close in prayer and take your communion home, and no, we won't do that. We started a couple of weeks ago, for those of you that have been away enjoying a break, enjoying a holiday, hope you're refreshed. We started a couple of weeks ago in Psalm 18, and the importance of this psalm is that it's mentioned twice in the Bible. It's in Psalm 18, and then in 2 Samuel 22, David writes this exact psalm, other than for just a few minor changes in one of the verses. And we looked at a couple of weeks ago how that David's in a battle with giants, one of them being Goliath's brother, and David becomes weary, he becomes tired, and his 4 fighting men rise up and they defeat the giants. But David doesn't say thank the Lord for my friends who defeated the giants. David goes, I thank you to the Lord who delivered me from the hand of the Philistines, from the hand of the giants, and from the hand of Goliath. And then he writes this psalm and starts it off, I love you, Lord. And we talked about the fact that the word love is not a friendship, not even the way we would just say, I love you. The word love is a picture a mother has for the love of her child, or a father has for the love of his children, or the love that God has for us. And then last week, Pastor Beck described who, and even though they sound great things, I wanted even when we started this morning to declare them, because at times in your life and times during the week, sometimes we've just got to stop, lift our hands and declare who God is. So Pastor Beck went through that last week. David described who God is. The Lord is my strength, my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, my shield, my salvation, my stronghold, especially in the good times and in the times where we feel like we're being blown over. We often get restricted in things we go through. They overwhelm us. And we're going to look at this word in a minute. They restrict us. They hold us in. And in our own ability, it's not easy to get out. Years ago, when Judith and I did an overseas trip, and we went to Italy, and we hired this beautiful car which didn't have a GPS. So here's one lesson for you today. Ever go to Italy, make sure you got a GPS. Make sure it's in English. Anyhow, we're driving along, thinking we're going into the right spot, when we end up on a road, and the further we go down the road, the narrower the road gets until we get to the end, and I think there's only water on either side. And we had to try and reverse out. You know that when we go through things in life that overwhelm us and restrict us, we don't have a reverse gear. And it's not like in your car, I'll just reverse out and off I'll go. We're not able to negotiate the way out or even the way forward. How do we keep getting back up and following him when we find ourselves going through things of life, and many of you are going through different things? How do we keep God, Jesus, at the center? Not even the church, not government, not the things of the world. How do we keep Jesus? That's the greatest challenge you and I have. How do I keep Jesus at the center of my life? How do we trust and obey as we keep following him? What happens when we find ourselves in a constricted place, and then we find the joys, even as we sang this morning, when you least expect it, amazing grace. Grace that holds us, empowers us, saves us, and equips us to go on. In Psalm 18:6, we're just backing up before we get to where we're going to go this morning. David says, in my distress, I called upon the Lord, I cried for help. The word there for distress means to be in a tight place, in a corner, hemmed in, restricted. Have you ever been there? Gosh, I'm the only one. You're in a place where you're surrounded by hopelessness and despair. These are the times when we can even question ourselves or others who maybe not followers, maybe people you work with or people you live beside. They will go, why would you trust God? Why would you put your hope in God? Does it even pay to serve him? And I'm not talking about money or possessions or even blessings. Sometimes when we go through stuff and the enemy comes and lies with, does it even pay to serve him and follow him? Now, David in this psalm is going to explain to us, yes, it does. And into these very situations, God demonstrates to us as we call upon him that he alone is God and that he is with us and for us. Pastor Beck mentioned the storm from the psalm that David talks about. And in that relationship with God and in the storm, he describes and declares who God is. After the giants were defeated, he doesn't even thank his fighting men. He just says, God delivered me. And declares, you are my strength, my rock, my fortress, my shield, my stronghold. Verse 16 is a beautiful verse. It says, David says, God reaches down and lifts me up. Well, hang on, I thought the 4 fighting men defeated the giants. David says, no. God reaches down and lifts us up. We pray for you. We pray for whatever place you're going through, whatever you're facing. God can even speak to your heart. He's able to reach down and lift you up. Matter of fact, when he says, David says, when I cry to you and heard it, it's like our very cry goes into God's very eardrum. And he lifts us up. We're going to pick up in verse 19. From fighting with the giants, from a restricted place, from a small place, David says, he has brought me into a broad place now, a large, spacious place. He has rescued me because he delighted in me. The word there for delight means takes pleasure in, delights in, desires. You know, the enemy will lie to you. We could even convince ourselves that God doesn't delight in me. He doesn't even like me. We can't even convince ourselves that he delights in us because we look at ourselves in the mirror. We see our weaknesses. We see our shortcomings. We see where we've slipped off. We see this week where we've sinned or yelled or whatever we've done. That we read that verse like, oh, it must be David, but not me. He won't rescue you. He's forgotten you. And we're tempted to give up or give in because we believe with this head and this mind, God doesn't delight in me. He doesn't delight in what sin does to us, but he loves you. He delights in you. He made you. He formed you into his very image. He sent his only son for you. And if you're watching online this morning, that's for you again. It's not even that God delights in those who follow him and goes to church. It's like when we leave church this morning, it's as if we've chalked up a brownie point for the week. We're better than those who couldn't make it this morning. It's not even that he delights in us because we follow him and not those who don't. So we look at the evil and the sin in the world, God doesn't delight in that. You know what the prophet Ezekiel says? Ezekiel says this, God says, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked. The death of anyone. I have no pleasure in those who will perish without me. And so God says this, turn and live. He's speaking to those who were far from him. He's saying, turn and live, because I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, in someone going to lost eternity. We probably do sometimes. I'm not going to ask you to think of the most evil person you can think of at the moment, but he loves to intervene in the circumstances of our life to rescue us when we're hemmed in, we're in a tight place. Will I make it for no other reason than he delights in you? I say this often, I shared it with someone this week. We have to look back, not to go back. But how did I get here? Did I get here in my own smartness? Because of my name or because of something else? Or but God? Turn to me and live. You know how often that we should be doing spiritual U-turns? Turn to me and live. In the ESV, for that verse, it will use, let me go back. He brought me into a large place. He rescued me. Other versions would say, he delivered me. It's a key word. The word delivered is mentioned in this chapter 4 times. And if we read it in our English Bible, we would just think it's delivered. But in the Hebrew, it has 3 different meanings. We've already sang one of them this morning. Matter of fact, we probably sang 2. It's found in verse 2, verse 17, verse 19, verse 43. Reads the same, delivers, or rescued, but has 3 different meanings. The first one is this, found in verse 2 and verse 48. I think Pastor Beck may have mentioned this last week. The word there for delivered, you see it on your screen there. I put the Strong's number for those of you who would like to do further study. It means to save or rescue. It means to make a way of escape. We just sang it. You make a way. It means to slip through. It means deliverance by going through to a safe place or to bring out. The children of Israel were hemmed in. I think that's probably where that song was written from. They come to the Red Sea. Pharaoh's army's coming behind them. They have nowhere to go. And God opens the Red Sea and makes a way of escape for them to go through. He delivered them by making a way of escape. He saves us by taking us through to a safe place as we trust him. Remember, we're sheep, not cattle. We're not driven. We just listen for the shepherd's voice, and he goes, this is the way to go. Psalm 91 says, because he has set his love on me, I will deliver him. I will make a way of escape. But in verse 17, it's the word Natsal. The word there for delivered means to snatch away, to pluck out, to rescue, to escape without fire in an instant. It's like a miracle. This is the one we all want, by the way. I've seen that happen in my life. I've seen people literally carried into church screaming in agony and bang, immediately healed. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work like that. This is the one we all want. When God doesn't do it this way, we can be very tempted to give up on him. Look at everything I've done for you. I pay tithes each week. I do that. You haven't delivered me instantly yet. Unfortunately, I could list you people who used to be amongst us that happened. It means to disentangle. In 2 Kings, we left the chapter out. In Isaiah 37, this is what happens. King Hezekiah and his army are surrounded by 185,000 men, fighting men. I'm not too sure if they went to sleep that night, but while they were sleeping, God steps in and in one night wipes out 185,000. They wake up the next morning. Good night. There's times in our life where we've cried out for a breakthrough, healing, finance, whatever it is, wisdom, and God comes through. That's what happens in verse 17. But in verse 19, he uses the word again. He'll use the word deliver. Oh, this one, he's actually going to take us through the situation. And we only get through because he equips us for the fight. He arms us ready for battle. He prepares us. He equips us. He girds us with strength. This is the importance of us all coming together. It means to be armed and girded to go through. But I don't want to go through. I want you to deliver me out. And the unfortunate part about going through is you don't know where through ends over here. If he said the Lord delivers me to go through, and in next week he will, we go, oh, that's okay, I'll just wait for that to happen. But no, he girds me, he equips me, he strengthens me to go through. Some of you have been going through for years, but he's still delivering you. Remember, he delivered me because he delights in me. So he equips me to go through. Ephesians 6, he tells us to put on the armour of God. We're not fighting one another, we're fighting an enemy, and in that whole armour we're to stand, we're to use the shield, we're to use the sword of faith to defeat the enemy, we're to use prayer, we're to use praise, as we sang this morning, to strengthen us and equip us to go through. Yes, he does sometimes deliver us out. Yes, sometimes he does open up a way of escape, and then other times he says, why don't we all stand together? Why don't we strengthen and stand with one another? Because we're going through. David uses the word 3 times. Snatched out, we love that one. Go through a way of escape, well, that's okay. He arms us for battle, ready to go through. Do I have to? You know what this one does? This one strengthens our faith. Because there's people in your world that may never come in here who are going through stuff, and you're able to tell them, I too am going through stuff, but this is how I'm getting through. This is where our faith is developed. This is where our trust is tested. If God just snatched us out all the time, we wouldn't have to do anything. We'd be pretty feeble Christians. But he does come at times to snatch us out because he realizes we're not able to bear it. But then he equips us, he arms us, he strengthens us to go through. And the promise is in all 3 of them is that he delights in you. Then David says in verse 20, and the way you read this, you think, oh, David's done all this himself. No, David's not saying he kept himself pure, strong himself. He's really actually saying in humility. He goes, he rewarded me for doing what's right and staying pure. I will follow his commands and I will never stop. I'll not sin by ceasing to follow him, no matter what, for I've kept my eyes focused on his righteous words, and I've obeyed everything he's told me to do. I've done my best to be blameless and to follow in his ways, keeping my heart pure. I've kept my integrity by surrendering to him. Again, it's not about, look how great I am, a person of integrity. No, I only keep that by surrendering to you daily. And so the Lord has rewarded me with his blessing. This is the treasure I've discovered when I keep my heart clean before his eyes. As I follow him, I trust in him, I rely on him, and I keep Jesus at the center. It doesn't say we won't have ups and downs. It doesn't say we won't have trials and temptations. David would continue to face those all his life. He wasn't perfect, as we are not. He was a man after God's own heart. He was a man with a shepherd's heart, so he kept bringing his heart to the Lord, kept Jesus at the center. You know, it doesn't take long that let me just say, it doesn't take long that I can allow in pride, whether we look at we're better than someone else, or whether we're not in the same place as someone else, or we can try and control something. It becomes all about me. It doesn't take long till I can allow in pride and I can say, you know what? I can live this Christian life on my own strength. And at times we do. Until David's affirmation of righteousness was evidence of his humility, not his pride. His heart to obey the Lord, even though later he would blow it. David would write Psalm 15 only a couple of Psalms before, and he would say, hey, who can come before you, Lord? Who can come into your presence? Who can stand before you? Who can worship in your sanctuary? This is David's response. Only those who do what is right, who speak truth from a sincere heart, and refuse to slander others, or harm their neighbours, or speak evil of their friends. I think we've probably all done that at one time. And then we come before the Lord. I wonder if there's a challenge there for us as we're following him. Help me to do, Holy Spirit, what is right. Not what is easy, but what is right. Help me to speak truth from a sincere heart. Help me to refuse. It doesn't say don't slander others. David says those who refuse to slander others. This is where we need other people in our life. Go, well. Because we're very easy at running off at the mouth. David says, or harm their neighbours, or even speak evil of their friends. Why would we try and keep our heart pure before him? Because we're followers of Jesus, and not because David told us not to in Psalm 15. David's saying, I'm not going to sin by ceasing to follow you, no matter what. No matter what, I will trust and obey. We're not going to sing this hymn today, but I'm going to read it to you. It's very hard to read a hymn when you're used to singing it. So if I break out into song, you can throw something at me. J.H. Sammis wrote this hymn in 1887. When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory he sheds on our way. While we do his good will, he abides with us still and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Not a shadow can rise, not a cloud in the skies, but his smile quickly drives them away. Not a doubt or a fear, not a sigh or a tear can abide while we trust and obey. Not a burden we bear, not a sorrow we share, but our toil he doth richly repay. Does it pay to serve him? Not a grief or a loss, not a frown or a cross, but is blessed if we trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus than to trust and obey. But we can never prove the delights of his love until all on the altar we lay, for the favour he shows, for the joy he bestows, are for them who will trust and obey. Then in fellowship sweet, we will sit at his feet. We will walk by his side in the way. What he says we will do, where he sends we will go. Never fear, only trust and obey. Trust and obey. Because there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. It's one step. Trust. Obey. Follow. Trust. Obey. Follow. It's staying close, staying attached, staying thirsty. If you've got nothing to read this week, just go read Psalm 25, 42, 63. David talks about how I long for you as the deer thirsts for the water. It's a picture of a deer whose heart is nearly beating out of its chest as it's running, looking for water. even when other paths beckon. Psalm 25, one of my favourite psalms, David says in verse 4, no one, you can write your name in there. David says, no one who trusts in you will ever be abandoned, disgraced, or ashamed. No one. And at times it doesn't appear like it's that it pays to serve him. And sometimes it appears that others and some of you in here go through things worse off than some of us have even faced, and it doesn't make sense other than I will trust and obey no one. No one, no one, no one who puts their trust in you will ever be disappointed or ashamed. David goes on, we're going to finish with these last two verses. With the merciful, you will show yourself merciful. With the blameless, you will show yourself blameless. With the pure, you will show yourself pure. Look at this. And with the devious, you will show yourself shrewd. You know what shrewd means? To wrestle. That's one of the Hebrew words for it. It means to wrestle. He meets our crookedness with his own shrewdness. And where did this come up in all of our messages this year? Jacob. Showed up when we studied Jacob. He wrestled with God, same word, and he met God, he encountered God. Jacob's crookedness was no match for God's mercy and grace. The devious come along, and we look at that. God's going to show them shrewd. Yeah, God's going to wrestle with them until they have an encounter with him. Because our crookedness is no match for his mercy and grace. David was merciful to King Saul. God was merciful to David. David was loyal. God was faithful. He wasn't sinless, and neither are we. So we keep bringing him our hearts, because sin separates me from God. Actually causes me sometimes to sidestep around God, who stands there with open arms. Come to me, and we kind of like do a bypass around. That's pride. He delights, he rescues, he delivers, he reaches down and lifts us up and out. He takes us through, he makes a way of escape. At times he delivers us out, he snatches it up, and then he empowers and equips us to go through. He girds us with his strength. However he delivers, the promise is that he will. Yeah. And the promise is whatever he takes us through. You can hear the words to Jesus and the disciples around in the middle of the lake in the dark. I am here. Do not be afraid. Trust in me. I'm going to finish with this verse. You know that all of us have a story here. You have a testimony. You have something to be passed on to those following you. David writes in Psalm 112 this, praise the Lord. Blessed is the man or the woman who fears the Lord, who delights greatly in his commands. His or her descendants will be mighty on earth. The generation of the upright will be blessed, or they will be a blessing. You have a story of what Jesus has done in you, for you, how he's taken you through the wilderness, how he's delivered you, and it's still going on, and it affects our relationships, people coming after us. It affects our friends. It affects our descendants. It affects our community and city. It affects people that are following us, our church, our community, our city. Yep, it affects everybody by following him, by praising him, and putting our trust in him. We will all trust in someone. We will all trust in someone. Psalm 20, David says this. I'm just pulling these out of my head. I shared this with the teaching staff the other day. Psalm 20 says, some trust in chariots and some in horses. Means nothing to us, except the chariots and horses with the nuclear weapons of the day. The children of Israel were told, Solomon was told, do not accumulate horses. So you can't have chariots without horses. Some trust in chariots and some in horses. As David says, but we will trust in the name of the Lord our God. We will trust and obey. I was in distress. He brought me into a large place because he delights in me. Let's stand this morning. Have your communion there. Just start to sing back. Praise you, Lord. Praise you, Lord. Praise you, Lord. Just lift your hands before him as we worship before we come to communion this morning.